have Portugal Day coming up on June 10th. So June is the time of year for holidays, so you will find a lot of different celebrations happening in this lovely month. But welcome everyone. If you're just logging in right now, please share your name and where you're from in the chat, and we will be taking questions up as many as we can. Hi, Mike and Wendy from Arizona. Hi, guys. Amanda, hello from Indiana. All right, just another minute or so, and we will be getting started. I know it says we're wrapping up questions right now, but no, you can feel free to ask any questions that you have with moving to Portugal. We are really excited to be here and to be answering those questions. Hi from Florida, great to have you here, Allie. And it looks like we are at the top of the hour, so I think, yep, we are ready. Hi, Mark. Hi from South Dakota. And Susan. Hi. Hello, Susan. Great to have you here. So a couple of updates just before we jump in with our questions from all of you. One thing I just wanted to let you know is that they have finished the election cycle for the snap election that was here in Portugal on May 18th. It went pretty much the way that all of us were expecting it to go, and there's been a lot of conversation with people asking how it feels here in Portugal right now, in general in Europe, with a trend towards a further right leaning politics. And I'm leading off with this because I know it's top of mind for a lot of people, but I do want to assure you that even though there has been more folks in Portugal voting for the farther right party in Portugal, it still is not the predominant thought process here. It is still not as extreme right as some of the extreme right policies and parties that we've seen in other countries. And though they have moved into second position, they still are substantially behind the PSP, the socialist centrist party that is forming the government. The prime minister has been tasked and given basically a referendum saying that he needs to do the things that he's promised. One of the biggest conversations that's happening right now in Portugal is about immigration. And I know that that's a really touchy subject. And because we are all immigrants and people that are looking to relocate to Portugal, it is top of mind. One of the most important things I want to share is how confusing it is when you've got these heavy gotcha headlines and then the reality of immigration and what's happening in Portugal. And truth be told, there isn't any conversations going on in Portugal about limiting immigration through legal channels. All of the D visas, except for the golden visa, and I'm going to set that aside for a moment, but the rest of the visas, the D7, the D8, the student visas, all of those are business as usual. They are not anticipating, announcing, or making any changes to those visas, and they encourage immigration, and they depend on the investments from foreigners as part of their robust economy. There is conversation. It has not been enacted upon, and it will depend on the decisions of the newly elected government. There are conversations about eliminating the golden visa. The conversation is around eliminating citizenship for sale. And it's not just happening in Portugal, it's happening across countries in Europe. And basically, the golden visa concept has run its course a bit. So the reason they're concerned about it is people are able to pay to get citizenship without living in Portugal and becoming part of the culture, investing their time and effort into learning how to live in Portugal, and they're receiving a passport for that investment. And that is what they are discussing about eliminating. And as a person that lives here and understands what it's like to invest in this beautiful country that we now call home, I can understand why they want people that carry a Portuguese passport to have an investment in Portugal, as culturally and language and presence would really dictate. So this is a very complicated topic. There's lots of nuances to it, and there are a lot of conversations happening across Europe right now about immigration. But just because I know that's top of mind, and we had a lot of folks that forwarded these questions to us before we started, I thought it would be best to just jump out there. So if you have questions, feel free to fire away. If there's any additional information that you'd like to discuss independently, you can always schedule a call or reach out. But right now, that's what we're working with. And Julie's asking about, how does the new IMA office work versus the old? Well, that's a great question, because work is kind of, it's a little difficult right now. Their best laid intentions of creating a new process to help enable people to go through the paperwork has really not been going smoothly. There's been backups in permit renewals of applications. It is definitely still a process they're trying to refine. The good news is for people applying from the D7, D8 realm at the beginning, even going through getting their appointments, that has been steadily, it's been going well, and they've been opening up more and more appointments for the folks that go through the first step and onto the second. Renewals, however, getting your appointments for renewals, they're still requiring in person. They removed the online option for renewal, and it is backed up. So it's not going as smoothly as we would wish. The process is not getting that much faster for that 2-year renewal point. But, they continue to say that they're hiring more people and that they're working through the backlog. And we can only hope that they stay focused on that, as they have had a significant amount of complaints and even, formal complaints and lawsuits filed because of the delays. But right now, it's a work in progress. It's not going as fast as one would hope. Amanda's asking, we're exploring using U-Pack We Ship, and we're working with PTP for relocation. Once we ship our stuff, how does our stuff get from our port to our future home? Well, most U-Pack We Ship, you schedule it to go to your address. So that's important to make sure that it's scheduled all the way and that you're paying for the moving service that will pick it up through customs, transfer it onto a moving company truck that U-Pack We Ship has independent relationships with, where they'll contract that, and then they'll coordinate it being delivered to the door. And if you're not here yet, or if you're not able to receive it, we can coordinate that with you as we hold the keys to your property and be there so that it can be delivered into your property. But you do need to coordinate with the shipping company, whether it's U-Pack We Ship or whomever you use, to do what we call door-to-door, to make sure they pick up from your place and take it all the way through and deliver it to your residency in Portugal. And Ingrid is asking, does Portugal The Place provide the name of the attorney that they recommend with move-in and with work? Okay, so I'll answer one at a time here, Ingrid. Yes, so we work with Caroline at Move-In, and they have a process where they do an introductory call with Julia, who's the account manager. And then if you want to move forward, then they'll connect you with Caroline. And with regard to the D7 visa and its popularity, could you comment on the rough percentage of people that after 90 days and greater hire an immigration attorney and summons IMA to facilitate paperwork in the process? So right now, the D7 visa, if you qualify for the D7 visa in a straightforward manner, and what I mean is you very easily fit all the criteria, and people do it for themselves. They are not hiring immigration attorneys and are not needing to hire immigration attorneys after 90 days. Those processes have been going smoothly. People have been receiving their visas we're seeing about 75 days to 100 days. That seems to be the average right now, coming out of San Francisco, New Jersey, Washington, D.C., Houston. That seems to be our general time frame that we're seeing. And from that point on, we're getting about 50% of those people that are getting the appointments on their actual temporary visa permit that's issued at that initial appointment. For those that don't get that issued, then folks are making the choice, if they wish to use an attorney, to help them schedule that next appointment, or if they want to continue to call and reach out on their own. And at that point, that's a personal choice. It's really about how much you want to deal with it and go through all the emails and the phone calls trying to get the appointment, or if it's worth it to you to pay for somebody else to do that on your behalf. So I don't really have a percentage, but it's really how people are feeling when they get their permit, if they need to travel right away, if they have something urgent that requires them to get that appointment as soon as possible, or if they're willing to wait and keep calling until that appointment comes up. All right. So Kareen is asking, currently in the Carolinas, hello, and what part of the registration process requires the 1-year lease application? I'm still securing a remote job, but want to start the process. You definitely want to wait for that 1-year lease to the very closest date, as close as we can get to your appointment. So if you're in the Carolinas, you'd be in Washington, D.C. And so what we recommend is we start looking for that 1-year lease about 6 weeks before your appointment. Everything else you want to get lined up. Then you have that FBI check that needs to be apostilled. You want to get that in a little earlier than that because it still needs to be valid after your appointment. So you want to be pulling that about 30 to 45 days before your appointment. And then we try to get that lease going about 6 weeks before. So you don't have to pay for it any longer than you absolutely have to. But at the same time, it's registered. You've got all your paperwork and documents so that you can go confidently to your appointment. All right. And Pedro is asking, can you apply for a mortgage prior to getting into Portugal? And if so, how long is the mortgage valid for? Okay, so when it comes to purchasing a property in Portugal with a mortgage, it's different than in the US. There's 3 key elements that you have to be ready and prepared for. Yes, you can apply for a mortgage from living in the States and not having a house yet because you're applying to buy a house. But the things you need to understand is, one, all mortgages in Portugal are age rated. They will give you a mortgage from the oldest person in the relationship to 76 years old. So if you're 66, you have a 10-year mortgage, for example. The other thing to understand is that they will be rating the mortgage differently. They don't do pre-approval letters here. You can't apply for the mortgage first, get like a pre-approval letter, and then go out and shop for a house. It's a little weird feeling here compared to the States because it's reverse. You look for a house first. You enter into a commitment to purchase the house. You go through the promissory contract process. You put the money down on the house. That money is non-refundable to the buyer if for some reason the sale falls through, and that includes not getting a mortgage. Once you've entered into that agreement and you've put that 10% down and you have what's called the promissory contract, you take that to the mortgage company, and then the mortgage company goes through the process of evaluating you and equally evaluating the house for qualifying and being assessed for a mortgage. So it's always about 90 days for the close on a home with a mortgage. And it takes about 60 days from the time you agree to the promissory contract for the banks to come back with offers. And they will give you offers of up to 80% or 70% of the evaluated amount. They reserve offers of 90% for Portuguese citizens only, and the evaluated amount will be based on what the bank evaluates, and you cannot renegotiate the sale of the home, the price that you agreed to pay based on the evaluation. So you do need to be prepared for the fact that if the house is $300,000 and the bank evaluates it for $290,000, you're going to get 70 or 80% of $290,000 and still be responsible for the additional $10,000 to make to the sale price. Ingrid, do you know if there's any discussion in Portugal about after 5 years having the D7 that will be extended to obtain dual citizenship? Oh, absolutely. That's how it works. So for example, we're at the point of applying for citizenship ourselves, and Clyde and I are here on the D7. So it takes about 2 years to get your passport. That's the expected time. So you start the application process for citizenship. And at the same time, I have to extend and renew my temporary the D7, the visa for another 5 years. So basically what that does is that gives me all of the allowances for the travel and having a valid residency permit while your citizenship is being processed. So that's part of the process, and you will want to have an attorney to help you with the citizenship application at that time. And Julie's asking if we could speak about the real estate rental market and the leasing application as it relates to the D7 visa. Absolutely. So with the visa, the D7 or the D8, you need to have a 12-month legal and licensed lease. And I know this gets a little confusing sometimes because if you go into the consulate's website, they haven't updated their website in years, and it used to be different. So there is some old information that sits on the website saying that 6 months is okay or an Airbnb is okay, but that is not the case. They are declining applications that do not have a 12-month legal and licensed lease. And what that means is that in Portugal, if you want to extend your home as a long-term rental, you have to register it with finance and agree to pay taxes on the monthly income. So the owner of the property has to register it with finance as a long-term lease, and they pay taxes on that income. They pay 28% per month of that monthly income in taxes. So when we're talking about a registered lease, what happens is on Idealista, for example, about 50% of those properties don't qualify. They're either registered as short-term properties like Airbnbs, so they cannot be used as a long-term, or the owner of the property wants to do kind of what we would call under the table. They don't want to register it because they don't want to pay those taxes. So they're not qualified for the visa either, because you have to show proof. It's a document that comes through the finance department that you've registered the lease is showing in your name, and that you show payment of the deposits. So for the specifics of the visa, you have to have a very clearly lined, very registered, everything kind of T's crossed and I's dotted, for it to qualify. So that's why about 50% of the inventory that you see online in Supercasa or Idealista just doesn't count. And one thing you can see as clues is if it says available for rent for 6 months, or available during the season, or available, if they're saying things like that in the copy, more than likely they haven't registered it for a long-term lease. Please describe the humidity and comfort levels. Okay, so that's a great question, Joan, and I love getting into this because, boy, this is one of those conversations where it gets really relative. I have clients from Florida that absolutely think this is the driest country they have ever lived in, and then I have clients that come from like Arizona, they're like, oh my gosh, the humidity. So it is a little relative, of course, based on your own experiences, but in general, there are a couple things to understand about the humidity in Portugal because it comes up a lot. Portugal is a country on the ocean. We are a country with a lot of marine layer, and that makes for the green rolling hills, and it makes for this beautiful climate. But you do get some humidity, but not at the levels of Florida, not even close to the levels of like Georgia, Atlanta. I grew up in the Northwest in Oregon, and it's more similar to that. It's more similar to the humidity levels that you would get in like Northern California, the Oregon area. And what I mean by that is that you definitely feel it, but you aren't just like overwhelmed with the humidity on the hottest days. It doesn't come down on you with that heaviness of air that you can see in some places. Where the humidity conversations come in is a lot to do with the construction of the homes here. Homes are constructed well. And there's a lot of confusion because in the States, we build with stick and paper, right? We build wood houses with, with the boards, and they go up really quickly. And we use primarily that material for our homes. Here in Portugal, for literally hundreds of years, they build in stone, brick, and now in concrete. And what that does is that creates a very different interior feel. And the homes that you will feel are many times, especially if they're slightly older, are going to feel almost like they can get a greenhouse effect if you don't focus on ventilation. And what I mean by that is if they're closed up too tight and then it gets warm, you can create that perfect storm to create kind of a humid environment inside. So some of the key things to consider when looking for homes in Portugal, aspect is number one. Is it south facing? Does it get natural light? If it's a north facing house or apartment, it can literally be in the same building as a south facing and have entirely different climate feel inside. Very important. Aspect is one of the most important pieces. Another piece is understanding the ventilation of the house. Do the bathrooms have fans? Do they have windows? Are you able to keep the windows open? What is the ventilation in the home? You have to keep air circulation going to keep the homes comfortable. And then what is the heating and cooling? A lot of the older homes don't have a heating system of any kind. And then you will feel the humidity because you aren't able to get the home temperature regulated as much. So looking for a home that has modern, what we call mini splits here, the AC systems where they have units in each of the rooms where you can also have heat, cooling, and dehumidifying, which will run and kind of circulate the air. That can all lead you to the comfort that you're looking for in your home. Another thing to understand is, unlike in the States, you will not find restaurants, cafes, places like that running air conditioning in the summer. You're going to think that you're going to go inside of a restaurant to cool down if it's a hot day, and oftentimes it's hotter inside than outside because energy costs are something that the restaurants are very aware of, and in many cases they don't have or don't run air conditioning. So being prepared and dressing properly so that you can sit outside, that kind of thing will be something to understand, because places just don't run air conditioning 24/7. It just isn't the thing that's done here. So Julie is asking if it's best for her husband for them to apply for the D7 as an individual or as a couple. If you qualify as a couple and you have the resources to show that the income is supported by both of you, by all means, applying in as a couple, but both getting your D7. So what I'm saying by that is, let's say, Julie, you are the primary income earner and your husband would be able to show that he could qualify under your passive income in this case. You can both apply individually for the visa. He does not have to family reunify. He'd go through all the process individually using your income because you are married. And so your income is considered combined. So you would have everything exactly identical, and you would use your income with his application to show that you're married, and he would apply individually. He doesn't have to family reunify. He can apply and have his own visa, which I highly recommend, because the family reunification process right now is one of the slower processes as opposed to the individual visas. You're welcome, Amanda. No, it's great. I love these questions, and keep them coming, because we have a lot of information that we love to try to help and get out there. And if there's something you've been wondering about, I know other people are thinking about it as well. So please feel free to send those questions out. Oh, so Julie, so the income requirements this year for a couple applying for the D7. So the income requirements, I'm going to round up slightly, but it is just under 1,500 euros a month for a combination for two people. And so then you need to have an equivalent of that for 1 year in the bank account. So you need the monthly amount, and then you need to have about 18,000 in the bank account, and I'm rounding slightly up, to qualify for the D7. Now, I always advise that if you can fund your Portuguese bank account with more than the bare minimum, it's really advisable to do that. One, they like to see that for the application. And two, you're going to have expenses with your lease. You're going to have utilities. You're going to have things you need to have coming out of a Portuguese bank account. So you want to make sure that your account isn't running on the margin. You want to make sure that you have money in there to be able to cover your expenses. Do you really need to wait until we are retired to file a D7 application if we have proof of passive income? You must have 3 months of receiving the passive income, not just proof. So, for example, if you are, 6 months away from retirement and you have the documents showing you will get that, that's not sufficient. You need to have received it for 3 months and show proof of deposit before you can apply. Any issue shipping a collection of Scotch whiskey? No, not at all. I know there's a lot of people that would like to be your friend because that sounds fantastic. But unless it's an extremely rare item that qualifies over 25,000 euros, if you're moving into like the antiques, then there's insurance issues that you definitely need to discuss and look at. But if it is a collection of scotch and whiskey that is, within kind of the normal ranges of value, then there's not any issue with that when you ship it under your one-time opportunity to ship without being charged any tax or duty because you're relocating to Portugal. Any banks in the USA that are Portugal owned that I can deposit funds as part of my D7? No, you have to have a Portuguese bank account. Even Santander, there's a couple of banks, Santander, there's a couple of them that have banks in the US, but they're affiliated, but they don't qualify. You must have a bank account in Portugal. So right now, Julie, we help our clients all open a bank account. The one that's doing it online at the moment is Novo Banco, and they'll open the bank account and we can do it remotely and get it all set up for you. So that's not a problem, but you absolutely have to have a bank account in Portugal. Hi, Sherry. You're in North Carolina and got your appointment in Houston. I'm seeing it stressed that you need separate appointments. Our confirmation both shows the same time, albeit on different reference numbers and payments. Is this correct? Well, it's absolutely correct that each individual needs separate appointments. It is possible that you snagged appointments with two different people at the same time. So if you have different reference numbers and different payments, then I would use that and go with that. But it is absolutely correct that you have to have separate appointments, but they have multiple people. So maybe somehow you happen to snag the same time with two different employees, but that is unusual. But you definitely have to have two appointments, but the different reference numbers and payments make it feel like you might have just coincidentally gotten them at the same time. Absolutely, no problem. Any difficulty getting the NIF number and the best and easiest way to do it? It's very straightforward. If you're going to be asked some basic documentation, you need to use a company when you're remote, like Borders or eVisa, or NIF. We partner with a variety of them. We partner with Borders. They've been great, but there's a lot of companies out there that you can use. We can help you navigate that as well, Julie. We can do introductions for you, but it's as straightforward as just doing the application and paying the fee online, and it takes about 10 days to 2 weeks. And as soon as you have your NIF, then we can open bank accounts. You can do the lease. That'll get you on your way to your application. And Sandra, in moving personal items to Portugal, were there things you wish you would have brought, and were there things you brought that you did not need? Boy, that is such an important question. And I really love it when people ask this, because this is one of those learned experiences that I wish I could go back and change. And I wish someone would have told me. I bought into the conversation on social media that said you need to be a minimalist, you need to get rid of everything. And I really started to feel guilty about wanting to bring things that I love. So my husband and I, we sold practically everything. We sold art collections, we sold book collections, we curated for years. We got rid of things we loved because we felt weirdly guilty for wanting to bring this with us. So we pared it down to almost nothing. And then we brought stuff like clothing, winter clothing. I don't know why, parkas. I have no idea what I was thinking. Office supplies. I mean, random weird stuff that we felt like we needed. And then we got rid of stuff that we kind of felt like we shouldn't want to bring with us. And then when I got here, not only was all the clothing a complete waste, I don't own really anything that I used to own because the humidity is different, the temperature. I don't need the heavy winter clothes. Linens and lighter clothing are definitely more in line. Office supplies, I mean, I brought paper with me and it's not even the right size. It's A4 here. And like, it was really, really not good what I brought. I really focused on practicality. And now I have a beautiful home and I miss the art that I sold, that we'd curated. I miss the books so much that I had spent my adult life collecting keepsakes. So yeah, definitely bring what brings you joy, and don't think there's one right way. The one thing I can tell you, kitchen things, don't bring giant pots and pans. They don't fit in the ovens here, but definitely bring measuring spoons, measuring cups in the imperial system, because until you get this used to the metric system, it's nice to have those familiar measuring tools. So Cindy's asking, with respect to the D7 visa for the rental property, when does rent become due? Before we have the VS appointment or some future date? No, you will have rent due monthly from the time you agree to the lease until you arrive in Portugal. I would expect that you should plan for your moving expenses to have about 3 to 4 months of rent that you will pay without occupying the property. It's a cart and horse feeling, but you will negotiate a lease. You'll usually pay first, last, and security. And then once the time has gone past that first month, you will then start paying rent monthly after that. The landlords have no incentive to delay, because they could rent it to somebody tomorrow that could pay right away. So you definitely will be expected to pay in full every month, whether you're occupying it or not. Yeah, so you're north of Seattle. So you understand, Joan, it's the same thing. Light is everything, right? You've got to get fresh air, and you need to get natural light. That'll make all the difference. So Allie's asking about applying for the D8 with your husband and baby. What are the requirements for income savings for that people? So that's an equation that you do. So you need 1.5 times. So so I'm rounding up slightly. It's 3,300 for the first person. So then you're going to need, for the second person, you're looking at about, just making sure I have, and then for the third person, for the child, there's an additional amount. Let me get that in here. So you're looking at about, and I just rounded up slightly, about 5,300 per month in income to cover on the D8 for a family of 3. And then you still only need the 18,000 in the bank account. You don't have to have equivalent to that for a year, but you do need to show that you have a full amount for the first person, 50% for the next person, and then the dependent is a percentage of that. So that comes to about 5,300 per month. So Crane is asking, once we secure a lease prior to the DC appointment, am I paying rent on a vacant property for several months until finally settling in Portugal? Also, are new developments significantly more expensive with the influx of immigrants? So to your first question, yes. As soon as you agree to the lease, you need to plan for your moving expenses to be paying for the apartment, including utilities, for the months that you are not residing there. So let's say that your appointment is August 1st and you find a property by July, your rent, you negotiate it to start August 1st, you pay first, last, and security. You'd pay September, October, November until you get your visa to move. And during that time, you'll also pay for your utilities. Those will have to be switched into your name. So you can expect to pay for electricity and water and gas if it's required during those 3 months. The landlord will expect you to take them out of their name and put them in your name. When it comes to the new developments, if the new developments are available for rent, because all apartments, majority of apartments in Portugal are what we call in the US condominiums. They're individually owned by owners and individually rented. So a new development could have a bunch of people that live in it that are full-time owners. You could have some long-term rentals. You could have some Airbnbs in the building. So significantly more expensive is a hard one to respond to because it depends on location, type, style, but they're not always, they're priced according to the amenities, not so much about immigrants. It's just what amenities are offered. So Julie's asking, is there a location in Portugal that would be a better location to obtain your 1-year lease as it might relate to getting your D7 visa approved? They don't use location for consideration. So as long as your visa application has a legal and licensed lease, it can be anywhere in Portugal. So it's not going to help or hinder depending on where you're looking to lease. What's the easiest way to set up a bank account? Well, When you work with Portugal The Place, we do it for you. So we get you connected with our contact and we can do it all remotely once you have your NIFA. So Novo Banco is the only bank right now that is opening remote bank accounts for folks. So if you are not in Portugal and you need to get that set up, then Novo Banco is the one that's doing it. And for our clients, we handle it and connect you with our contact and make sure that you're supported through the whole process. If you're coming to Portugal and you have your NIF, you can go in and open a bank account with Novo Banco. And right now, limited opportunities at a couple of other banks, but Novo Banco is really the one that's being the most generous and helpful with immigrants at the moment, opening up bank accounts for foreigners. When should you open the bank account? Well, that is something you're going to need to fund it. So you can't open it until you have your NIF. So your NIF is your very first step. And then opening that bank account is really dependent upon the process that you're in, but you're going to want it for the lease because you're going to need to set up automatic payment for your rent. You're going to need to set up automatic withdrawals for your utilities. So you really need to have that bank account set up before you start your lease, or if you purchase a home for sure before you do that. So somewhere within that mark of about 2 months before your appointment is a good time to make sure you have that set up. And then you need to fund it. You want to give yourself a couple weeks to make sure it's fully funded before you go to your appointment. So all the transfers have shown and posted, and you can print all that information off for your appointment. Can your 18-year-old daughter come over on your D7 visa? Yes-ish. So it is possible to show her as a dependent still, but it really depends on where she is in school. If she's still enrolled in school as a student in grades, up to like her senior year, then yes, she can come over as a dependent. If she's already graduated and is moving into like the university years, then it may be a process where you need to have a separate visa for her coming through on a student visa side. It's a little bit of a gray area there, Sherry, and that's one where it depends on where she is and what she's doing at her age. How do you ship liquor to Portugal? You can ship wine and spirits through shipping companies. I would recommend using a company that specializes in it. There's multiple companies out there that will give you quotes on insuring and packing it, because the one thing that happens with like you pack, we ship, you take responsibility for it and you pack it. And that means that if anything goes awry, they're not going to be responsible for it. So most people that are packing and bringing large quantities of specialized liquor, wines, that kind of thing, they'll use companies that will insure it and will pack it so that it can be shipped in the right temperature controls as well. So that's where I would really, we have companies we can provide quotes for, but that's where I would use someone that is a specialist, because it's valuable. And if you pack it yourself and it breaks or gets overheated or something, then you don't have any backup on that. Julie's asking, with the 1-year rental lease, if we pay the deposit and sign the contract as part of our D7 application, what happens if we don't get our visa approved? That's absolutely a question people ask, because it does feel very cart and horse. In the rare instance, you don't get your visa approved. And the reason I say the rare instant is Portugal's not trying to decline applicants. We are not seeing our clients getting declined. They are just making sure you have all the qualifications. But imagine if it did get declined, then you will have to fulfill a portion of the lease before you can break the lease. So we do try to write into leases for our clients. We try to write in an exception that allows you to break the lease if the visa doesn't get approved, but not all landlords will accept that. So if you get a standard lease in Portugal that doesn't have that waiver, then you are expected to fulfill a quarter of the lease, and then you have to give 4 months notice to break the lease. So basically imagine you have a half of the lease you've agreed to that you will be expected to pay before you can get out of that lease. So it is something to consider if you sign a lease that is a 2-year lease or a 3-year lease. That's something we really talk to clients about, because you'd have to fulfill a percentage of that lease, and then give a 4 months notice to get out of that lease. So it's really important to calculate that when you're looking at the leasing process. So Sherry is, can my daughter join me on the D7 visa if she's attending college in the US or in Portugal? She's not sure where she'll be attending yet, so I want to make sure if she has a choice or not. So yes-ish. If she is a student and she comes over as a dependent, she doesn't have to go to university in Portugal, but she would have to be here full time. So if she's in college in the US, she wouldn't qualify for the visa because she wouldn't be able to be here living in Portugal enough for the residency. But she could come to Portugal and register for something not as robust as a full-time university course. She could register, for example, for language and take US courses online, but she'd have to be a resident here in Portugal and then show that she was still a dependent and living with you, and then she would come in through the student angle. But she couldn't, for example, be enrolled in university in the US and live there for 9 months and then come and live in Portugal for the rest of the time, unless she just came over on regular tourist time, just the 90 days you have as a tourist. So that's tricky if she is going to kind of have to make a decision if she's going to do a gap year and come to Portugal and then take some courses online and then enroll as a student here, or if she's going to commit to staying in the US and then come and visit you more on the tourist visa. No problem, Sandra, no problem at all. So Julie's asking, if we want you to help us obtain the 1-year rental lease, about how much time in advance do you need to secure a property for us? We asked for 6 weeks. We've done it for less. So, it can be done, but all of us are a little like, woo. So 6 weeks is the sweet spot. 6 weeks is the time that gives us a chance to get you as many options as possible. Make sure you don't feel like you have to take the first thing that's available, and negotiate the lease. Make sure all the property is registered and you have all the paperwork, and anticipate something going wrong, because sometimes no matter how much we try, we go through the process. Occasionally something pops up, the landlord changes their mind, something comes up. So we need to leave a little time to pivot if we need to find another property. So 6 weeks is like the sweet spot. A lot of folks sign up with us now, for example, telling us they don't need it for 4 or 5 months. We help them navigate everything else, the bank account, all that. And then we start scouting for the property in that 6 to 8 week period before the visa. Can friends occupy in the early months of the lease before we arrive as we wait for the D7 visa? Yeah, it's as long as, if it's furnished and it has everything you need in the property, if it's ready for someone to occupy, absolutely. It's your property. You are the leasee of the property. So you can come over and stay in it. You can come over as a tourist and stay for a month. All of that is it's your property to do with. But if you rent a semi-furnished place or an unfurnished place, you would need to obviously prepare it. If you rent a place that doesn't have towels and dishes and things like that, which a lot of them don't, if it's furnished, it's not an Airbnb. So it's just a property. That's something to take into consideration. And of course, most folks don't pay for internet until they're about ready to arrive, so that they don't have that expense for months. So you'd have to decide if you wanted to pay for that, for them to have access to the internet when you're not there. With house prices rising, is it better to purchase or rent? Sherry, that's a loaded question. There isn't a better, because for every person there's different considerations. And I really, really encourage people to look at their own particular, finances, reasons for wanting to invest versus renting. There's a variety of pros and cons. At Portugal The Place, we're not a real estate agent. I help people, for example, find the homes to purchase. And I'm not a real estate agent. I don't work on commission. I work with anyone that has a property for sale. And right now, I can tell you the property prices are going up, and the demand is definitely there, and the inventory is down. So if you're looking to invest, if you're one of these people that don't want to rent, buying right now makes sense, because we're only seeing forecasts of inventory continuing to be limited and prices going up. But if you are a person that isn't sure about their long-term plan, doesn't know if they're prepared for that level of investment, or are not completely financially financially ready to purchase, then renting is a great option. It's just if you are in the market or considering buying when you move to Portugal, say in the next 12 months, 24 months, you're more than likely going to secure a better price now than say in 18 months because we've just seen the prices going up. Hello. What is the average cost for private healthcare for a married couple? I've heard that it's best to purchase private to not overload the free system and leave that for the Portuguese. This is a great question, and you actually have to purchase private health insurance for your IMA appointment when you're in Portugal because we haven't been paying into the public system, so they ask us to have private healthcare, and the private healthcare system here is great. The average cost is a little hard to give a number, but I'm going to kind of jump in there, but don't hold me to it because there's lots of variables. If you go with the top of the line health policy, which is MGen in Portugal, and why I say that is the company that doesn't have a pre-existing condition. They don't do a medical questionnaire, and they work with all the private systems in Portugal. That's who we have. That's who a lot of us pick because of its ease of getting into the system. You can pay anywhere per month for, and I'm going to say individuals that are between the ages of 35 and 55. The reason I'm saying that is once you get into the older ages, the age rating really makes a difference. And when you're under 35, the prices are very, very reasonable. So if you're in the 35 to 55 region, you can expect to pay for a couple around $250 a month. And remember, there's no deductibles in the same way. There's no maximum. They don't have the same kind of co-pays. You don't have different costs for prescriptions. Prescriptions are still covered through the public system. So that covers a lot. And it's hard to do apples to apples to the States because you just don't have all these capped amounts. For example, there's no ambulatory care. There's no ambulance care in your private health insurance because ambulance care is provided to everyone in Portugal at no cost because it's covered through the system. So that's one of the reasons it's lower. You don't break an arm and get a 2,000 euro bill for an ambulance ride. So it's hard to compare because it's so different. But between $200 and $300 a month for the top of the line, all the bells and whistles insurance would be a good place to be budgeting. If you've got someone under 35, you could be as low as 40 per person, 40 or 50 per person, quite literally. If you're over 55 in the 60s, you could maybe be pushing more to 200 per person. So Chase is asking, since the majority of the people in this webinar are in the US, how are the sentiments towards Americans and towards Americans who may be leaving the US more frequently to settle in Portugal? So that's a great question, Chase. Online, if you look in the social media rooms, comments on videos or things like that, sometimes you'll just see this kind of bot-like response of like Americans go home, things like that. It doesn't look very friendly. I have never once encountered that in person in Portugal, no matter where I go. And I am a pretty high profile person with people sending me direct messages and things like that. And we are not getting that kind of sentiment that you see in the kind of long threads on different posts. Now, is there a frustration about the cost of living going up on housing in Portugal? Absolutely. Do Americans sometimes get blamed for things because we're kind of obvious and there and easy targets? Yes. But Portuguese people are incredibly generous. They have been very open. We haven't had people getting upset with us. In fact, more often than not, people will tell us how excited that we are in their community because they've been able to add more staff in the restaurants. They've opened businesses like dog groomings and different things, and they're seeing the investment that people are making in the towns they're in. So I think it's the respect that we need to continue to provide to the folks that are in the community that we're now joining, and also being aware that they're under a lot of financial stress. The Portuguese are feeling the housing crunch, and for them, the cost of living is not low, it's higher. So being very careful not to say how cheap it is in Portugal, how easy living, because for the Portuguese, there's a big disparity on the income versus the cost of living. So You're welcome. So so yeah, that question, Sherry, that's one also if you want to reach out, we're happy to dig into it. There's a lot of different ways to navigate this. I mean, we brought our daughter who was 19, was just in that same kind of age. And there are definitely ways to do it, but it does take a commitment to being in Portugal and attending an international high school, but we don't know where yet. So would it be best to rent? Well, again, that's a conversation. I would really encourage you to schedule a call and talk about it because there are areas with 3 or 4 choices of international high schools that you could purchase in. There are areas you could rent in, absolutely. But Porto and Lisbon area like Sintra, Cascais, Estoril, these are the areas that have the strongest international high schools. That are going to give the most robust curriculum. But there's a lot of ways we can narrow it down for you because is it a British curriculum or American curriculum? There's a lot of different things that go into that equation. So Ingrid's asking, do you know what interest rate Novo Banco provides with the example 20K? They don't. They are not interest-bearing accounts. So you won't be earning interest on that money. And you need to have that in the bank. You need to show that balance when you go to your second appointment, the one you receive when you come into Portugal. So when you go to your IMA appointment, you need to show that you have that bank balance. And so they do have monthly fees between 8 and 10 euros per month. So it's something to anticipate. A lot of people are like, well, Novo Banco is not the cheapest. They don't give interest bearing. Here's the thing. The reason most banks don't open accounts for foreigners, especially Americans, is because America, the US, requires a crazy amount of reporting back to the IRS, back to the US. So it takes so much labor for a Portuguese bank to open a bank account for an American. So if you're British, they'll open a bank account for you because they don't require the same paperwork. But because of our unique status in paying taxes everywhere, whether we live in the US or wherever, the banks have all of this extra documentation every time a bank account is opened that's required. And for many of them, it just doesn't cost out. Americans will open a bank account, for example, Millennium used to open bank accounts online, but a bunch of Americans opened them, never funded them, and then never decided to move to Portugal. And they took all the time to report the bank account to the US, do everything, and then never received any deposits, never made any income on it. And it cost them a lot of money. So unfortunately, Novo Banco is now the only game in town that offers this service. Once you get here and you've gone through your IMA appointment, then you can go and open, we have a bank account at BPI, there's Santander, there's a ton of other banks. Once you're a resident and you have your card and everything you can go to that have different interest-bearing accounts. But to get started, Novo Banco is the game that will get you there for the visa. All right, so Joan's saying, for the appointment, are we just showing birth and marriage certificates or do we need to provide certified notarized copies? How many copies will we need? So you are going to need certified copies. You're going to want to get certified copies of bank accounts, of your certificates. And you're going to want to have copies certified copies for your VFS appointment in the US, and then another set that you have available for your IMA. So you're going to want to get 3. Now, the reason I say 3 is because if one gets lost somewhere, something happens, you don't want to have to request another one. It's easier just to get them and have one as a backup in case something gets lost and they send you an email and say, hey, I need this again. So we suggest getting 3. Are there websites like Facebook Marketplace or eBay in Portugal? Seems crazy to ask, but is there interest in silverware or China? No one wants it here. No one wants it here either, Sandra. There are websites like Facebook Marketplace. Facebook Marketplace is really popular in Portugal, but there's also one called OLX, which is kind of like a Craigslist, similar to that. And there is eBay Portugal, so you can absolutely shop on those. But if you think the US has China, you should see the amount of China that's in Portugal. That's what they're famous for, is producing ceramics in China. And so like every family here, because they're huge families, every family here has like 4 sets of 24. I mean, the amount of China that you can buy for pennies to the dollar is just unreal. So yeah, it's not going to be something that you can sell easily here. All right. So I think at this point, looking at the time, we're coming right up to the top of the hour again. You guys are great. I love being able to jump into all these conversations, and you guys ask really, really good questions. The one thing to know is that right now the process is working. People are getting their visas, but you have to be prepared to be patient and be prepared for it to be a lot of, time, kind of hurry up and wait. So anything we can do, any questions we can answer, we're here for you. We can support you through this. And if we're doing another Q&A coming up on the 16th. If you want to jump back in, have more questions, either reach out directly, schedule a call with us, or join us for another Q&A. But thank you so much. It was great, again, chatting with all of you. And I hope you have a fantastic week. Thank you, and ciao.